I have today's presenter, Claudio Aguayo. Claudio, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Claudio Aguayo. I'm a Senior Digital Innovation Advisor at AUT. I work in innovation in education and how we can use new technologies, new frameworks, new pedagogies in practice. So we get to play and test and do a lot of R&D and transfer that to colleagues such as, for example, Tom and other practitioners that can take that knowledge into practice. And yeah, today is my pleasure to present some of our work around immersive reality learning and mixed reality. So happy to start now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
We've got the late James Burt, but that's okay.
Do you want to introduce yourself, James?
Say hello, James. We have a new member.
Oh, hey, sorry, I had my speakers down because we've got people chatting around me. So, good day, everyone. Sorry, I'm late. I've just had student meetings. So, my name's Dr. James Burt. My area of research expertise is in the area of mobile mixed reality. So, specifically looking at augmented reality, virtual reality, and I work with Tom in relation to the mobile SIG as it relates to mobile mixed reality. And we have a upcoming call for a journal where we're looking at mobile mixed reality or mobile apps and its connection with COVID-19. Have you pitched that one yet, Tom?
No, that's on the to-do list for next week.
Right, that's me. Good day, everyone.
So I've made you co-host, Claudio, so over to you now.
Okay.
So I've worked with Claudio for a number of years, and we've done some quite exciting, fun projects in a variety of different discipline contexts, predominantly in health, higher education. But Claudio's going to take us through some of his projects today.
Do you see?
Yes, we do. Yep.
All right. So you should be at the title slide. This is a presentation I did some weeks ago for Tom for one of his online seminars. So I'll use the same. And pretty much in this session, I'll be looking at augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, XR as well as is being called, and show some of our projects and open the floor for discussions at the end. So briefly, first to introduce the notion of augmented reality. Augmented reality is the overlaying of digital information upon the view of the real world environment using a camera or a mobile phone, for example, where you can add content digitally to the view of the real world. So I don't think you need much explanation there unless someone needs further explanation. Otherwise, I'll jump into showing an example. This is a project we ran. This is actually one of the first projects. This is our first mixed reality project from 2015. We were looking at bringing the forest in a gallery, targeting kids and to teach about climate science in the context of West Auckland. So this is just showing a concept on how we could do that. We had a lot of discussions on what is the best way to bring a forest inside a gallery, or should we take the people to the forest, etc. And we decided at the end it would be best to use the indoor space, principally for safety reasons and access to internet. And I think I'll have more on this later. This is another example of augmented reality. So this is a real research occurring in Easter Island in Rapa Nui. And the fish you see in the background which is a vegetarian fish, so it will be eating only algae and plants, had all of these microplastics inside. So how can we tell that to our audience? Reality is definitely a good way. to bring that information alive for particular audiences. And just to show an example of how AR could be used in this context. In terms of virtual reality, it involves the use of a computer to create an interactive immersive experience via the use of a head-mounted display. So comparing AR to VR, in virtual reality, the immersion, the digitalization of the experience is at its full in terms of the mixed reality continuum, which I'll present shortly. And as you may know, there are different modes or ways of using virtual reality. What you can see now is the most basic one. I think this is even the first generation Google Cardboard, where you use your own phone to display a 360 view of a scene, and the user using the gyroscope of the device can look around the scene, etc. This is a more advanced mode. This is a Oculus setup, I think, if I'm correct. Yes, Oculus Rift. And in this case, you have the liberty of moving the head and therefore moving the scene inside the virtual reality, which is more immersive in many ways compared to the cardboard for interacting with the scene. Just another representation of how a headset can bring a scene into an immersive experience. In this case, someone looking at an elephant in a forest environment. Which takes us to the concept of mixed reality. It's an evolving concept. Many of you will know that. And depending on where you come from in terms of the use and implementation of mixed reality, it can be embraced in different ways. We tend to use the original definition from Milgram and Kishino from 1994, which refers to the idea of a virtuality continuum. So mixed reality referring to the merging of real worlds and virtual worlds within a continuum. And this is represented in this graphic, where in the left side end, you have the real environment. So where immersion in terms of digital is non-existent or very little, all the way to the virtual reality end, where the digital immersion is at its full. And in between, you have things like augmented reality or other similar versions. So left side, no digital, right side, 100% digital, within this idea of a mixed reality continuum. Just some examples again, I guess. Real environment, RE, can be referred as the real world we see, we experience every day without the help of devices. Then going to augmented reality, to augmented virtuality, as I call it. And on the virtual side, the fully computer generated interface type of virtual reality environments. And then comes this notion of extended or immersive reality. It's still evolving in the literature. Different people embrace it from different perspectives. But as a definition, we could say extended or immersive reality expands from mixed reality in considering multiple dimensions, going beyond the hardware as tools, but also including platforms or engagement modes, whether cognitive modes of engagement or embodied modes. And the X stands for anything reality, somehow accounting for the various views and yet to come technologies that will fall eventually within this concept of XR. So mixed reality is more based on, MR is more based on what we have today. And it refers, at least in the way we use it, to the original continuum proposed by Milgram and Kishino. And XR adds to that by accounting for yet to come technologies and other dimensions of the use of digital in immersive learning or immersive reality. So as I was saying, the focus here is on dynamic, self-determining, and the idea of facilitating learning environments. That's how we tend to approach this MR/XR affordances. Just to show some ideas, we believe in the, well, it's happening now, obviously, as, for example, the Oculus lenses and other lenses where you have a blend between virtual reality and augmented reality, as the headset allows to read the environment, and somehow through the use of sensors or scan cameras, you can interact with a virtual reality scene with your body, with your hands, and somehow represent content or information or particular experiences in a virtual mixed reality XR mode. And as I was saying, these are ideas from one of our students. So I will introduce 2 or 3 projects on AR, VR, and XR. One of the latest is Pipi's World, which is a project that looked at marine ecological literacy in visitor center environment in a marine, next to a marine reserve here in north of Auckland. This was based in God Island Marine Reserve, for those of you that know the place. And what we did, following this mixed reality continuum proposed by Migra and Kishino, we established different entry points or experiences along the continuum. So in the real environment side, we had real world hands-on snorkeling. So students engaging with the actual environment without digital involved, in this case, underwater and marine reserve experiencing. Then moving along the continuum, we created in the Marine Visitor Center a kelp forest, which was focused on haptic and the idea of coloring and engaging with the kelp forest from a children activities perspective, to then having developed a website, which we used as a focal point for this project. People could get more knowledge on the project through the website, prepare the visit, prepare the class, etc. We also developed an augmented reality app where we demonstrated scientific concepts such as the lobster march that occurs here in this area of Auckland, food web, plastic poster where people could augment different local animals and see what type of plastic they tend to eat, and more advanced concepts such as ocean acidification. So we were working with senior primary students in this case, and some of those concepts may be more suitable for secondary students, but through the use of augmented reality games, we attempted to explain OA or ocean acidification for those younger audiences. We also had QR codes across the space, and they will trigger experiences using cardboards and your own device. This was a bring your own device project to show land, underwater, or aerial footage of the reserve. So presenting the reserve through 360 virtual reality. And at the very digital end, we developed a virtual reality computer-generated interface type of virtual reality where students could engage with Pipi, the fish, and Pipi will take students in a tour to present how it is to live outside the reserve or inside the reserve in terms of risk of being fished from fishermen, sorry, and how inside the reserve you are safe in that sense. So we introduced this intervention at the Marine Discovery Center, and we had the students to interact with this continuum and this range of affordances, including the snorkeling, during their visit to the center. This is a view. You can see a view of the center in the background, and a simulation or a prototype of the app. And as I was saying, we had this idea of discovering the environment. This was self-led, so a lot of pedagogical and self-determined learning approaches, as well as free choice learning, which are more suitable for non-formal or informal environments, such as this one. And students or group of students, sometimes because they had to share some devices in some occasions, they were free to explore the center and to engage with different activities. You could immediately see how certain demographic groups, either girls versus boys, for example, will prefer different activities. That's a view of the lobster march. So we had 4 markers as the one you can see in the background of the device that will trigger what is happening when lobsters, male lobsters, start their march into the deep ocean to feed, really, represented in an augmented reality. We had the QR codes. Actually, this work. If you have a QR code scanner, now or later, you can engage with this and experience the reserve. We had a lot of VR headsets displayed around the reserve, so students could just pick one and use their own devices. This is to represent the activities we had for the students in the kelp forest. It was all around the idea of plastic cleanup and looking after your environment. It was quite a good one because kids will clean the forest by picking up all the plastic we had stitched in the kelp and take that to the rubbish or recycling station, which was next to the plastic poster station. So it was a way of connecting one station with the other station around a same theme.
So the kelp forest was about 2 meters by 3 meters, something like that, wasn't it? It was quite a large installation.
Yeah, and it had music, background displays of underwater scenes. So it was an invitation for students to somehow experience the kelp forest. And for us, it was a way to have a more haptic-based experience to counterbalance the more digital experiences.
So the students actually walked through a made-up kelp forest, which was pretty cool. So one of the big problems we had, Claudia, which you haven't sort of mentioned, you might later, but was just the connectivity. Just getting people signed on to the Wi-Fi at the center. That was the biggest hurdle we had, which I guess in hindsight we should have allocated more time to, but it was just the hurdles over passwords and logins, which was a real, just a basic problem to get students connected because they were using Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and the literature will say, technical and IT infrastructure to be in place for this type of intervention is definitely required. We asked for it with a lot of time in advance, 6 months at least. And the bureaucracy of that university was such that it never happened. And on the day they had like a solution for us, but it wasn't well embedded in the intervention. So we had that issue at the very beginning of the intervention where we did not have access to internet, which was vital for the use of many of these installations.
So the Marine Reserve was actually effectively a department of Auckland University, and so Auckland University IT department controlled the Wi-Fi environment, so it wasn't free and open like a visitor center might have been.
Yeah, and what you see now on the screen is to show PP's World in full VR, and that was developed with the theme of the user, the learner, experiencing the underwater world based on a marine submarine, and the submarine will allow you to communicate with Pippi the fish, or really to listen to Pippi the fish and follow Pippi. And on the non-digital side, we had the underwater experiential learning, which was by far, along with the VR actually, the most popular one. And here you can see I'm referring to real reality as a concept to demonstrate how important it is to use the real environment, not in a passive way, but in an active way, in terms of facilitating the learning within a mixed reality environment. And that's that's behind the idea of real reality here. And that led to this article, if you're interested in learning more about the project and the approach we used with Chris Eames from Waikato University and Tom. Yeah, published at the beginning of the year. But one aspect from this research and from that article is that at the very end of it, we touch on this notion of MR being a circular continuum rather than a linear continuum. And that emerged from this, from the findings indicating that it is hard to position a particular experience or a particular learning experience within a segment of the continuum. If you look at it as a whole in terms of time and space, because we had the snorkeling, but also all of the digitally enhanced and enabled experiences, you can almost start thinking of MR as a circular continuum, where you cannot kind of say this is happening in this part of the continuum in terms of amounts of digital or non-digital. And in terms of a framework or almost as a paradigm, it invites you to consider the design, development, and implementation of mixed reality from a different perspective, where you kind of forget about, am I going to do so much of RE or AR or VR or MR, etc., but to develop the whole thing as an ecosystem in that sense. And that's an idea we are still developing, and we are planning to publish some more with Chris, the other co-PI of the project, along those lines. But it was quite a finding for us in terms of reconsidering this linear continuum into a circular continuum. Here, I just want to touch on the work of one of my PhD students, Ali Tahiri. He's exploring embodied interaction principles for mixed reality. And he is coming from the notion of the lack of principles for designing mixed reality in terms of engagement with the body, the embodiment of the user in mixed reality experiences. He used the Iron Man movie as an example of how pop culture, or Hollywood in this case, will portray mixed reality. For anyone, it might be very hard to not suffer a cognitive overload if you have so much information going through your lenses. Or in the case of Tom Cruise here on the right, in the Minority Report movie, interacting with a screen like that after prolonged times might bring pain and sore arms, if you have to interact with the medium, with the device, with the screen in this case, in that way. So this type of examples led Ali to consider different questions around how should embodiment occur in terms of mixed reality spaces as a new medium. And his main question being what possible design principles might emerge from practice-based exploration of embodiment and embodied interaction in mixed reality artifacts. So he's exploring different projects as examples, including Pippi, for example, Pippi's World, and how systems can be created in such a way that the focus then comes along with the idea of using the body. And that touches a lot on Ishraq philosophy from Middle East that is informing his research. And we've been talking about it a lot recently, and the philosophy points to the idea of experiential learning and tacit learning needed to actually understand something or a phenomena, and also touches on theory from the Santiago School of Cognition and the idea of enaction, interaction of the self, of the person, doesn't only occur through your nervous system and your cognition, but also through your body. So this idea of enaction, embodiment in mixed reality, informed by Ishraq philosophy. This is another example from the same projects from Ali, where you can conceptualize the interaction of digital objects and your own hand, in this case, if you use a glove, for example, and how such concepts of tacit experiences or haptic experiences in an environment may lead to the experience itself. On the top left, how using 3D cameras such as Azure Connect and similar ones, you can engage with an interface just by moving your hands. So this is kind of taking the focus of the technology away from the visual, which tends to lead MR development, the visual interaction with the environment, and put more emphasis on the embodied, or in this case, the use of hands to interact with it. And that's what examples such as HoloLens, one in this case, are showing how you can interact with the environment, with your body as well, or this video here running in the background. So very briefly, based on those type of works, and I omitted quite a lot actually from the work we do, we can say that there's a shift from the focus on the individual, on the tool, for example, augmented reality or virtual reality, to an integrated immersive environment experience. So in the design of MR and XR, moving from the tool to the environment, to the context. That's not new, but sometimes forgotten by developers, depending on the discipline and the field, obviously. In the industry specifically, I guess there's more lag in that sense. And another one will be the idea of a shift in the pedagogy, or how to maximize such new technology-enhanced learning environments. So the classic question that refers to what type of philosophies, frameworks, and pedagogies should we be developing and using to inform the development of such MR or XR environments. Another one is the focus on generating adaptable ecosystems of interactive and self-determined learning points. So this whole idea of adaptation comes from inaction, from the Santiago School of Cognition, in the sense of people change, users are unique. And because of that, when you interact with an environment, with an interface, the interface should be adaptable to you and should be adaptable to your changes over time and space as well. So how can we generate or develop interfaces or technologies that are adaptable as an ecosystem to the learner and to suit every learner, every individual learner, based on their own social and cultural characteristics and needs? So
that's a big limitation of a lot of current implementation, or particularly virtual reality, which tends to be very linear experience, isn't it? And with very little option for the user to determine, apart from where they view, the interaction and the experience.
And it's a big open field as well, you know, because it's quite technical and technological in that sense to create adaptable ecosystems. And I think I have one more. So there's a lot of people already looking into the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning and virtual avatars and the social aspect of this as well, inviting to the consideration of mixed reality, XR, and the integration with new modes of technology such as AI, machine learning, etc., which kind of leads to a new paradigm in education. And this is something that I know James has been looking into it quite a lot, and his work also illuminates the rest of us in that sense. And that's it. So yeah, just a brief introduction on XR, AR, VR, and how we use it around digital learning projects. You have my email there if you want to contact me. And I'll stop my sharing now.
Thank you, Claudio. That was great. I really enjoyed that. I guess basically throw it open to questions and discussion.
Yeah.
As Claudio said, there's a whole lot more projects that he's been involved with, and I've been involved with him in as well. It's just a sampling of 2 or 3 of them.
Any comments, anyone? Or maybe anyone wants to add?
I just want to explore that problem you're having with Wi-Fi a little more. So is that having the infrastructure in a unusual place?
I guess that's it's almost a basic consideration at these days. You know, if you don't have the right tools, if you don't have the right infrastructure and network, etc., you cannot use the technology in as intended, I guess. And there's nothing new there, but it's just so hard sometimes to get it done. You know, get it to achieve that minimum requirement when it comes to
it was an interesting project because there was several dynamics, several members of the team of the key stakeholders and participants. So there was the Marine Centre and their staff. There was the university, which funded the centre and provided the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi infrastructure. There was the school and the school kids and their own devices, which was a bunch of iPads. And then there was, of course, the research team involving Claudio, myself, and a researcher from Waikato University. And so I guess a big part of the project was trying to change practice, and it was trying to provide a model. You know, what Claudio and Chris were doing was trying to come up with a model for the Marine Centre to implement to really up the game of the Marine Centre. So the basic problem was that kids would turn up. The Marine Centre just had a bunch of posters around the walls, and the only activities that the kids spend any time on were the interactive ones, which included a microscope, a touch pull, and one other activity I can't remember. So the whole brief was come up with a plan using technology to enhance this experience and get kids much more engaged and give them much more determination over the learning process than just going around looking at really boring posters and then playing with the touch pull. So the issue was around the infrastructure thing, was trying to upskill the Marine Centre staff into even engaging with that as a concept, because they hadn't. You know, we provided them with devices, and it was for a lot of them the first time they'd even used an iPad. And so they hadn't even thought of the basics of how do we get connected, and they'd relied on the university to do that, and the university had done it in a really convoluted way, and it was just like you should have thought of this to start with, and it just it was just a huge hurdle, just the basics of getting connected.
So apart from that point, the fact of training your staff as well, you know, they have to know how to use the technology. Something I didn't mention was that through this project, we were looking at how complementing classroom with non-classroom activities, so EOTC, education outside the classroom. And through this project, we were able to take the MR back to the classroom. because we had the app, we had the QR codes, we had the digital aspects, and what we did was to give all of those artifacts and products to the teacher, and she installed her own mixed reality setting in the classroom, which allowed for the knowledge acquired during the EOTC visit in the Marine Center to be complemented and transferred back to the classroom and continued and reinforced, especially reinforced because from an environmental education, marine ecological literacy point of view, many times you go to a place, to a visit to a zoo, to a museum, you learn things, but the moment you walk out the door, you forget, you don't reinforce, there's no follow-up. And through this project, we were able to follow up and reinforce and recycle. And kids created their own mixed reality kelp forest using plastic from their lunch boxes. And they invited the other classes from the school to be part of it. So it was quite a neat reinforcement strategy in that sense.
And the other stakeholders, of course, were parents. So there was quite a big group of parents, coming along to the Marine Centre as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. Hi. Such a cool project. I love it. Thanks for the opportunity to hear about it. I guess I was thinking about a few things. I've done research on how virtual reality or simulation, how people get a sense of connectedness to each other and to the environment. And I work with a psychologist who's he completed his PhD on how people get a sense of connection through the environment. We did some research on the ethical implications of people's sense of connectedness. In the sense of, we were looking specifically at simulations where a patient dies, regardless of what you do, or if you do, if you don't get it right, and the patient dies, a lot of the clinician students and clinicians who you run the sim through, they come away feeling quite upset and feeling really emotionally connected to the death of this patient, although it was entirely simulated. And I guess I was wondering if you've looked at all at people's sense of connectedness to the environment, to Pippi, to fish in general, or if there are any of those kind of social, ethical connectedness kinds of issues that you've been exploring or noticing.
In terms of PP and in terms of environmental education, there is one of the premises is to always try to communicate positive knowledge, but positive outcomes. Otherwise, you risk overwhelming learners and users around the crisis we are going through in terms of ecological deterioration of the planet. So we always try to show the positive and in that way diminish maybe those negative effects. But in another project we've been working with a lot with Tom, the Mesh 360, where we're exploring mobile mixed reality in health, in particular paramedicine. We also need to train the students to be able to cope with those situations when they actually practice paramedicine in the real life. So we have discussed a lot with the paramedics, the lecturers, in terms of how much stress is good stress in that sense, how much shall we push our students, and the more we talk about it, the more questions we have really, rather than answers. And that's something we are considering and using biometric feedback as well as a way to record how the body reacts, for example, heart rate and others, to also guide us, because sometimes, and Tom may complement, you may see a student perfectly normal from the outside, but actually she's going through 150 beats per minute, and you don't notice it, and the lecturer doesn't notice it, and you do the whole thing, the whole sim, based on that she's okay, but internally she's suffering a lot of emotions. So through that type of research, understanding what's happening at the emotional level has shown to be very important, and we have ideas in how to explore that further, but I would say it's just the early days at the moment. And that's what came to mind really when you mentioned SIM and our experience with paramedicine.
Yeah, there are some studies where they have taken biometrics, like you've talked about there, with the heart rate, temperature, blood pressure, etc. Yeah, and I mean, I've worked in simulation for about 6 or 7 years, and with thousands of students, and I've seen people faint and do all like people just throw up, and it's quite nerve-wracking stuff, eh? When you put yeah, I mean, I've worked with the AUT paramedicine students, and they do a lot of simulation, and they do it really well. So, but even so, it's quite daunting, some of this. I find myself just wondering how, when we've got all these opportunities with technology and with VR and mixed reality, it's really important for us to try and figure out those difficult questions around what we should
I think there's interesting implications. One of the other presenters we had from the University of Melbourne talking about using VR and the using that classic virtually walking out on a plank from a high-rise building, and noticing the difference in students' response to vertigo and heights. So I guess it's in some ways using biometrics, you can actually see the impact of a virtual learning environment on hopefully a person's learning, and actually facilitate changes in behavior, changes in stress, etc. Through that, and you can track that through biometric tracking as well.
Just to comment, Tom and Claudia, I think another notion that connects quite nicely with the whole authentic and embodiment of the surrounding and the environment students are in is actually authentic learning. Because authentic learning is how relevant the students are, how relevant the environment is to the real world that the students are engaging with. So the whole idea there is, yes, we know the environment we have created, but as Tanisha was saying, how do we then leverage that? And we make sure that the students are getting the most they can from that. So it's being aware of the affordances that arises, but also being aware that we actually don't fully understand that environment. So student feedback is also a part of that. But as part of the design is also going, okay, how do we scaffold the students into understanding the environment? So if they are traumatized by some simulation, how do they handle it? Have we put something together for them? So if someone is really not handling a hand which has been amputated and the blood is rushing out, how do we then, or what mechanisms are there for the students to then learn the skills to manage and handle that situation? I think that's more sort of embodiment of that whole true learning environment comes in, where students are really engaging with a sort of a frictional, non-frictional environment towards building more knowledge and capability.
I guess it comes back to the discussion of what are you trying to achieve, what's the learning outcomes, what are the demographics of your students, and is it appropriate? So, in the context of teaching, training paramedics, a little bit different to, trying to do the same simulation with, computing students or math students is probably not appropriate, So yeah, it's trying to line all those things up.
A classic example comes to my mind was working in journalism and working with a lecturer, and she was trying to teach students how to handle trauma journalism when they actually end up at a road accident or at a murder site, and they're actually talking to a witness, and they're actually hearing details, which is quite traumatizing. So the way she was doing was she was actually hiring actors to come into the class, actors like people who were parents to a person who has died, but a virtual environment can actually equally facilitate that sort of learning at a minimal
In a
cost.
safe way, yeah. Safe environment, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, because authenticity, I almost don't even think about, because I already have it so embedded, from working with you and Tom, that it's almost a given, but it's very important to always highlight that, the authenticity.
So Claudia, your cyclic, the whole continuum of VR, AR, and mixed reality, that's actually exactly what it's all about. It's all about authenticity, because you can't get authenticity by just looking at AR here and VR here and the real world here. But it's actually mixing all of that to come up and create something which is authentic.
Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you, Claudia. It's a really interesting presentation. And thanks everyone for participating, asking questions. I'll make the recording available again, like we usually do. And let's catch up again next week.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.